5th anniversary of December 2nd uprising, Yemenis remember moderate policies of the late leader Ali Abdullah Saleh. U.S. Passion envoy Tim King discusses in Oman ways to revive truce efforts. Government forces defend Houthi militias attacks in Tai's Governorate. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. 5 years have passed since the late leader Ali Abdullah Saleh declared a popular uprising against Houthi militia in Sana'a. On the 5th anniversary of that uprising, Yemenis remember the late leader's moderate and wise policies in dealing with chaos and political unrest. This report gives more details.
For 33 years on top of power in Yemen, the late President Ali Abdullah Saleh drew a policy that aimed at preserving the national interests of Yemen. Saleh's policy depended on three main pillars, including the multi-party system, the popular will, along with the constitutional legitimacy. With the three pillars, he stood in front of all challenges that could have driven the country into chaos within 3 decades of his rule. The late leader warned time after time against stepping out of these pillars, especially that they were the corners of democracy in Yemen. He succeeded through the General People's Conference and the grassroots to manage the political conflict in Yemen after the revolution in 2011. Back then, Yemen battled the popular uproar, and the late leader managed in this critical moment in the history of Yemen to unify the nation again with the Gulf Initiative and its executive mechanism in accordance with the constitutional legitimacy and the peaceful transfer of authority. Yet, the political conflict, tight interests, and foreign intervention rocked the Yemeni ship and diverted its course into more anarchy, war, and political vacuum. Those who were alongside Saleh indeed failed him and failed their country and its future. They turned to the army and dismantled it. Not even that, they have also incubated the terrorist militia and enabled it to storm the capital Sana'a and the state's institutions. Then they fled. They left the country, fled the field, and led the Yemenis to their predators. The late leader Saleh, however, remained as solid as he had ever been all over his life. Saleh and the GBC stood together, confronting the catastrophe in Yemen, with a new era starting to emerge, in which the citizenship, development, and the national ideals were threatened in the heart. He resisted by holding the pillars of the state, trying hard to revive the remaining shape of the state. Saleh opted to dialogue, not to the arms, in the last battle for the nation to restore the state from the hands of the terrorist Houthi militia. In that regard, the militia indeed backtracked their constitutional declaration and handed over their power to the Supreme Political Council, before they renegated all that and drove the country into a vicious circle of terrorism and violence.
3-decade rule, the General People's Congress, led by the late leader Ali Abdullah Saleh, has put education, especially education of girls, a top priority. This reflects a progressive vision of the party, which provided a model of good governance for 33 years. The following report gives more details.
Educators did not forget the early 80s, that period of time whose life was linked to the General People's Conference (GPC), which from the very beginning of its establishment headed towards teaching improvement and reinforcement so that the wheel of light began to turn. It started by enrolling thousands of male and female high school graduates in intermediate and higher institutes for training in teaching and learning methods, and then recruiting them in the educational corps in the civil service, ensuring that the majority of them get jobs immediately after the graduation and disturbing them in various schools and educational institutions in various governorates of the Republic. As well as tens of thousands of graduates of different majors were able to obtain educational jobs. The leading patriotic party, the GPC, gave male and female teachers the greatest attention, realizing the value of this elite of society that builds generations and nations at the same time. The government of the GPC was also keen to raise the standards of living for teachers by building housing for them, especially in the rural areas, and approving monthly salaries with approved allowances such as high living allowances, housing, transportation, and they continued to defend the rights of teachers through unions and civil society organizations. According to educators, those 3 decades during which the GPC and its president Ali Abdullah Saleh were the best years for teachers who obtained most of their rights without diminishing or fragmentation. Educators emphasize that the rights of teachers and educational, administratives and educational cadre commenced to erode since the catastrophe of February 11 in 2011, which plunged teachers into conflict and suspension of education in order to achieve partisan and political purposes and to trade their rights, which was actually reflected in their lives. The great catastrophe towards the teachers has been completed since the ill-fated Houthi coup on the 21st of September 2014, in which the militia coming from the caves of Sada to replace tens of thousands of qualified teachers with loyal people of theirs. They stopped paying them salaries, so teachers found themselves hostages to poverty and neediness until they were almost eliminated based on what is called the Work Ethics Code, in which teachers were at the forefront of its targets. There were teachers who had to leave their jobs in public education sector and move to private education sector. Some of them accepted to occupy jobs that are not even equivalent to their level of their academic potentials, and some were forced to fight on the fronts in order to make a living for their families. Others were displaced and fled towards the areas of the legitimate government. Some of them found what they were looking for, and some didn't. This is the case of the pioneers of enlightenment in Yemen, which the priestly forces wanted to return the country to the ages of priesthood and darkness. Hope remains spent on the absurd war ending, and those who know and realize the value of knowledge and teachers would return to lead the nation's ship to safety again.
Head of the Presidential Leadership Council, Roshan Al-Alimi, held talks in Abu Dhabi with the President of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. The discussions touched upon the developments in the Yemeni situation and coordinated measures to deter the Houthi attacks on national facilities and their disastrous repercussions on the humanitarian situation, international peace and security. The U.S. Special Envoy Tim King is in Oman to push for reviving peace efforts in Yemen. King met the Omani Undersecretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Khalifa Al-Harthi. The following report has more details.
In an effort to support peace in neighboring Yemen, U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim King, met with Omani authorities in Muscat. He held talks with the Undersecretary of the Foreign Ministry for Diplomatic Affairs and discussed efforts to assist Yemeni parties in reaching a political settlement that supports peace and stability in Yemen and the region as a whole. The delegation that was accompanying King and a number of foreign ministry representatives were present for the meeting. On November 27, King began a tour of the region. In addition to Oman, he plans to visit Saudi Arabia. On Monday, the U.S. State Department called on the Iranian-backed Houthi militia in Yemen to immediately cease their attacks on Yemeni ports and to engage in peace efforts. At this critical moment, we remind the Houthis that Yemenis are calling for peace, not a return to war. To that end, we call on the Houthis to immediately cease their attacks on Yemeni ports, which are disrupting the flow of much-needed resources and exacerbating suffering across Yemen, the U.S. State Department said. The environment created by the UN-mediated truce presents the best opportunity Yemen has had for peace in several years. Earlier this week, Houthi rebels backed by Iran targeted the Al-Dabba oil port in Hadramaut region. The Houthis launched a missile from a drone that landed at the terminal's gate in the town of Al-Shahr. Yemen has been split for 8 years by the conflict between the Iran-aligned Houthis and the military coalition, with the rebel movement controlling the north. In an effort to exert economic pressure on UN-led negotiations for a prolonged truce accord, the Houthis have begun striking oil ports in regions controlled by the government.
عرفت نفسي وأنا أشتغل في عمل الصيد. يعني ما يقارب عمري 14 سنة. أنا أعول 8 نفر في البيت. بالنسبة للدخل هو دخل يومي، تمام؟ على ما حول الله. أحيانا فوق، أحيانا تحت، أحيانا ما فيش. لو قدر الله واستوى شيء من خزان صافر وتسرب البترول، تمام، وأثر على الشعب المرجانية. نحن طبعا ما لناش أي شغلانة ثانية، يعني والصياد ما يشتغل أي مكان، يشتغل البحر بس. احنا حياتنا بسيطة جدا. اللي نتمناه يعني النقطة الأهم والأهم الإسراع في تصليح خزان صافر قبل أن تنتهي الشعوب المرجانية.
In Taiz, Houthi snipers targeted a young man while he was returning home east of the city. Sources confirmed that the citizen was hit in the right hand and the bullets lodged in his lungs. The injured person was taken to Al General Hospital to receive the necessary treatment.
While he was returning home, a Houthi sniper hit him in the arm. The bullet hit the arm and penetrated to the lung. Doctors said some of his ribs were broken. The people rushed him to the hospital to save his life, and he will undergo a surgery operation.
The joint forces put down intensive movements of the Houthi militia on the western coast fronts. The military media reported that the joint forces launched concentrated strikes on the militia targets, west of Taiz, confirming direct strikes that forced the rebel militia to retreat. In Ma'rib, a drone strike targeted a house in Al Wadi district and left several casualties among civilians. Local sources said that a drone strike, likely to be American, targeted a house inhabited by a citizen believed to belong to Ansar al-Sharia, the local branch of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The sources pointed out that the raid left 1 dead and 5 wounded. Moving to Al-Dala, a soldier of the joint forces was killed in another Houthi drone attack. According to military sources, the Houthi drone targeted a site where units of the joint forces were stationed on Al-Fakhir front. Coming next. Houthi drone attacks pose new threat to Yemen and the region.
ناس ندي ماء من الغيل والغيلة بعيد، كنا ندي بالدواب نعبي ماء وترجعنا. ننزل الساعة 5 رجعنا الساعة 9.
ما يجي لنا ظهر لأنه زحمة ما حد يخلي الجهل يغرق وإحنا تعبنا زيادة.
وكنت أحس صدري يوجعني وعز قدرك ركبي يوجعيني.
كنا ما نستخدم حتى نغسل أولادنا إلا يعني بأيام معدودة.
كنت أغيب على المدرسة لأن كنت أروح الديمة.
حتى وإن كان يجي الأمطار تروح هدم لأنه ما في معي خزانة.
الوقت نشتري ب30,000 هي مع استهلاك ما يغلقش معها الشهر.
بس راح تطلب الله ولا أي حاجة، عاملة كل شغلك على الماء.
Welcome back. Houthis targeting of civilian infrastructure and economic facilities represent a dangerous escalation that would deepen the humanitarian situation in the country. Recently, the terrorist militia has increased their attacks on key oil ports in the south. The following report has more details.
2 months after Yemen's truce expired, fighting largely remains on the hold, but a series of attacks by Houthi rebels could have serious repercussions for a country crippled by war. At least 3 drone strikes at ports on Yemen's southern coast have disrupted oil exports, the main source of income for the Arab world's poorest country and its Saudi-backed government. The strikes, launched by the Iran-backed rebels since late October, caused no casualties, but stopped some tankers from docking at the government-controlled harbors of Qina and Al-Dabba. They followed their failure to extend the United Nations-procured truce that was in place for 6 months until October 2nd and had brought a much-needed pause in the 7 years war. A new truce has been hindered by rebel demands that the government pay wages for civil servants and even members of the armed forces in areas under Houthi control, including the capital Sana'a. Revenues from oil exports totaled about $1.4 billion last year, according to the Central Bank of Yemen in government-controlled Aden. The cash-strapped state produces around 80,000 barrels a day, according to the government estimates, most of which is exported to finance the bulk of the government's budget. Since the Houthis seized Sana'a in 2014, the war has caused hundreds of thousands of deaths and pushed the disadvantaged nation to the brink of famine. An estimated 24 million people, nearly 80% of the population, depend on humanitarian assistance to survive, according to the United Nations. The recent port attacks, all claimed by the Houthis, undermine peace efforts, Rashad Al-Alimi, who heads Yemen's Leadership Council, said earlier this month. Recognizing their impact on Yemen's devastated economy, Al-Alimi warned of catastrophic humanitarian consequences if the government is unable to cover civil servant salaries and pay for public services. In a briefing to the Security Council in November, United Nations envoy to Yemen Hans Groundberg called the Houthi attacks a worrying development. These drone strikes deprive the Yemeni government of its main source of revenue from exporting oil and undermine the welfare of the entirety of the Yemeni people. The Houthis ultimately hold the advantage. While they may be militarily weaker than the coalition in absolute terms, they have little to lose and much to gain by continuing the fighting as they seek to win further concessions. The Houthis are essentially holding Yemeni oil ports to ransom. Nevertheless, there is still hope, but it's fading fast.
Humanitarian Affairs Officer at the United Nations, Martin Griffiths, announced that the international organization needs to raise $51.5 billion to aid 230 million people in the coming year. Griffiths stressed that the upcoming year will witness the largest humanitarian program to be launched in the world. The Saudi Program for the Development and Reconstruction in Yemen delivered 150 housing units to war-affected people in Aden. The project is expected to provide living conditions for more than 4,000 families. This report has more details.
As part of humanitarian efforts to support and assist those affected by the conflict and to help improve the living conditions of low-income families, the first phase of the Adequate Housing Project was put into action in the interim capital of Aden, with the goal of repairing and renovating the war-damaged homes in the city. The first phase of the project, which is funded by the Saudi program in partnership with the Al Walid Humanitarian Foundation and the United Nations program, included the delivery of 150 housing units out of the 600 housing units targeted by the project.
To help improve the lives of Yemenis, we delivered 150 housing units to families in Aden Governorate as part of the Adequate Housing Initiative, which is supported by the Saudi Development Program in collaboration with Al Walid Humanitarian Foundation and the United Nations Habitat Program. This project attempts to enhance the living circumstances of low-income Yemeni households.
The humanitarian objective of the project is to protect the safety and security of these properties and build a better urban future by providing sufficient housing for impacted people and covering the damages to homes and infrastructure. The restoration of 600 units benefits more than 4,000 families. The organizers also intend to devote a portion of the project to vocational training in construction and reconstruction crafts, with the goal of developing the skills of young people in these residential communities and giving them the opportunity to work and be creative.
We are targeting 600 war-impacted housing units, 150 of which have been fully restored and delivered to affected families. A part of this project was dedicated to developing the skills of youth in reconstruction and providing them with job opportunity.
The initial phase of this initiative is being implemented as a preliminary step to allow financiers and donors to assist Yemen's rehabilitation especially in the city of Aden, where the conflict has damaged over 13,000 homes.
مشروع يتكون من 600 وحدة سكنية وموزعة على 4 مديريات.
This project comprises 600 housing units spread out over 4 directorates, each containing 150 units. This initiative intends to revive the hopes of marginalized people whose homes were wrecked in the war.
A preliminary initiative to be followed by other, more expanded and comprehensive phases, which aim to restore confidence and hope among those affected.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. On the 5th anniversary of December 2nd uprising, Yemenis remember moderate policies of the late leader Ali Abdullah Saleh. U.S. Special Envoy Tim King discusses in Oman ways to revive truce efforts. Government forces deepen Houthi militias attacks in Taiz governorate. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.